You step into the corridor and immediately feel the silence closing around you like a hand wrapping itself around your throat. Not violently, but with the firm, measured pressure of something that has been trained to restrain rather than kill. The air is colder than it should be for a building that claims to offer shelter. And the walls, painted a shade of pale institutional cream that has long since surrendered any hint of warmth, seem to lean inward, narrowing your path with each step you take. You do not know it yet, but the moment your foot crossed the threshold, the world outside lost its right to remember you as you once were. The institution will not break you suddenly. That would attract attention, provoke questions, perhaps even outrage. What it will do instead is far more precise. It will erase you carefully, methodically, the way a clerk edits a record, one stroke at a time. So neatly that by the end you will not be sure whether the missing pieces were taken from you or willingly given away. You are not alone in this corridor. You feel the presence of others even before you see them. Women moving like shadows along the edges, heads lowered, hands clasped, bodies disciplined into shapes that seem designed to leave as little trace as possible. No one speaks. Conversation has become a luxury they no longer believe they deserve. When you finally reach the room where you are told to wait, a woman in a dark dress, her face pale with a kind of disciplined serenity, studies you with the quiet thoroughness of someone inspecting a new tool rather than a human being. She notes your age, your posture, the tremor in your hands, the hesitation in your breathing. Nothing is written down, yet everything is recorded. She does not ask why you're here. The institution already has its own reasons. Respectability, after all, must be preserved, and you, whatever you are outside these walls, have already been categorized as a threat to it. The building around you was not born from cruelty, at least not openly. It was built on principles the nation once praised: order, morality, rehabilitation. It was funded by donations from families who believed that discipline was a form of love, that silence promoted reflection, that obedience healed the soul. Parliament praised such places in speeches. Newspapers printed photographs of neatly made beds and tidy workrooms. Priests blessed the halls and congratulated themselves on the purity of their purpose. Respectable people do not create monsters. They create systems, and the systems do the rest. Long before you arrived, committees debated what to call women like you, constructing categories that sounded almost scientific in their precision. Wayward, at risk, morally fragile. The language was never designed to describe your life. It was built to justify your containment. Once labeled, you were no longer a daughter, a worker, a neighbor, a student, or a friend. You were a problem to be corrected, and correction, according to the institution, required erasure, not of your body, but of everything that made you inconvenient. As you sit on the straight-backed wooden chair, the rules are read to you slowly, as though they are being carved into your skin. You will rise early, work diligently, speak softly, pray often, and question nothing. You will address the matrons with respect and your fellow women with caution. You will confess your failings, even those you do not understand. You will perform your tasks without complaint. You will remain grateful for the opportunity to be restored. Every sentence is delivered with the soothing cadence of maternal concern, yet each one removes a layer of your autonomy. The most effective institutions in history have always known how to wrap obedience in moral language. As the days inside turn into weeks, you begin to notice that time has a different weight here. The routines follow you like a shadow. The morning bell that tears you from sleep before the sun rises, the communal prayers spoken in voices too exhausted to sound devout. The workroom where your hands repeat the same movements until they seem to belong to someone else. The matron walks behind you, her footsteps measured, her presence an invisible thread pulling you toward compliance. At first you tell yourself that you will resist quietly, that you will keep your name, your memories, your sense of self intact. But resistance inside a place like this is not a single act. It is 1,000 decisions made every hour. To hold yourself together becomes its own form of exhaustion. You watch the other women for clues about what survives and what does not. Some of them move with mechanical obedience, their minds already reshaped into the institution's image of virtue. Others cling to fragments of their past like smuggled objects, hidden beneath their silence. One woman bites her lip whenever the prayers begin, as if trying to keep the truth from spilling out. Another flinches at the sound of keys turning in locks, a reminder that freedom once existed but no longer belongs to her. A third has stopped reacting altogether, her face smoothed into a mask of resignation. These women are not broken through violence. They are broken through repetition. The institution understands that identity is not destroyed by force, but by monotony. Each day erases something small: your handwriting, your appetite, your humor, your confidence, until one morning you look in the mirror and see someone who has learned to move without being told. Someone who apologizes before speaking. Someone who prays for permission rather than forgiveness. You do not yet realize that this transformation is the point. Respectability is the institution's currency, and your erasure is its profit. Outside these walls, people sleep comfortably at night, believing that places like this protect the moral fabric of society. They do not see the cracks beneath the painted surfaces, the fear behind the silence, the steady draining away of the women inside. They believe that kindness sometimes requires firmness, that order prevents chaos, that certain women simply need guidance. They believe in the institution because belief is easier than responsibility. And so the building stands, decade after decade, sustained by complacency, decorated by charity, legitimized by religion, and insulated by silence. From the outside, it looks like stability. From the inside, it feels like erasure. And as you move through those early weeks, your name, the name you once spoke with pride, the name that held your history, begins to sound strange even in your own mind, like something borrowed from another life. You soon discover that the institution does not simply reshape behavior, it rearranges memory. It begins subtly with small corrections offered under the guise of guidance. A matron will tell you that an event from your past happened differently than you recall, and her confidence makes you question yourself. Another insists that the shame you feel was always part of your character, even before you arrived, and you start to wonder whether she is right. A supervisor reminds you that the world outside was never safe for women like you, even if you once believed it was, and the idea settles into your chest like a weight. These revisions accumulate, layering themselves over your thoughts until the story you once told about your life becomes unstable, fragile, and easy to overwrite. This is not an accident. The institution has long understood that identity thrives on continuity, and to sever a woman from her past is to weaken the structure that keeps her whole. Records are kept, but rarely shown. Letters from family are held back or inspected until only pieces remain. Outgoing mail is filtered for anything that might disrupt the narrative the institution prefers. Visitors are discouraged or carefully choreographed, allowed only to see selected rooms prepared for their arrival. The truth becomes a managed commodity, and you learn quickly that the safest path is to swallow your doubts and adapt. In the workrooms, repetition becomes a form of indoctrination. You scrub, stitch, fold, and polish until your hands move independently of your will. Each task is framed not as labor, but as moral cleansing, a pathway to redemption that is never fully reached. The matrons praise diligence with serene smiles that never touch their eyes, while punishing hesitation with prolonged silence that feels colder than any shouted reprimand. Silence is a language here, and it cuts deeper than words. You notice that some women have perfected the art of invisibility. They move quietly, breathe quietly, and think quietly, their minds wrapped in layers of self-protection. Others have surrendered entirely, absorbing the institution's definitions of them without resistance. A few, the rare few, carry a spark that flickers stubbornly, but even they begin to dim with time. The institution knows how to wait. It understands that the erosion of self is a slow process, one achieved not through dramatic cruelty, but through the steady application of order. Each rule you follow without question becomes a thread unraveling the fabric of who you once were. You observe how the building itself enforces obedience. Corridors are narrow by design, forcing you to move in single file. Doors are heavy, reminding you that permission, not strength, determines mobility. Windows are positioned just high enough that you can see light but not freedom. Even the grounds outside are structured to create the illusion of openness while ensuring control at every boundary. The architecture tells a story that the matrons never need to say aloud. You belong to the institution now, and the institution decides what parts of you are worth keeping. At night, the dormitories echo with quiet breathing, interrupted occasionally by muffled sobs quickly stifled beneath blankets. No one comforts each other openly. The fear of punishment is too ingrained. But in the dark, when the absence of supervision offers brief respite, whispered fragments of truth drift between beds, stories of the lives women once had, the mistakes that brought them here, the injustices that trapped them, the hopes they have learned to bury. These whispers are dangerous. They remind you that the institution's narrative is not absolute. They remind you that the women here are not merely categories or sins or lessons, but individuals with histories the matrons refuse to acknowledge. Yet even these quiet acts of resistance are temporary. Over time, hope becomes a liability. The more you cling to it, the harder the institution presses back. You realize this when a woman you've spoken to disappears from the dormitory without explanation. The matrons offer no information, and the other women, conditioned by fear, avoid discussing her. Was she transferred? Released? Punished? The uncertainty becomes its own form of control. The institution thrives on ambiguity. It keeps you obedient, compliant, careful. You begin to see patterns in how the staff divide the women, rewarding some and isolating others based on behaviors that appear arbitrary but are in fact meticulously calculated. Compliance is praised, doubt is punished, bonding is discouraged. The goal is always the same: ensure that each woman stands alone, emotionally unanchored, reliant only on the institution for meaning. Outside society continues with its routines, largely unaware that the women within these walls are being reshaped into versions of themselves that serve the institution's purpose. Newspapers publish articles celebrating the discipline and moral improvement found inside. Clergy speak of redemption and purity. Families eager to avoid scandal believe that sending a daughter, sister, or wife here is an act of care rather than abandonment. The nation nods approvingly, comforted by the illusion that such institutions maintain social order. No one sees or chooses not to see the gradual erasure occurring behind closed doors. One afternoon, during a rare supervised walk in the courtyard, you hear a bell ringing in the distance. It is not the institutional bell, but something older, deeper, resonating from a church beyond the gates. The sound triggers a memory you cannot fully grasp. You pause, trying to capture the fleeting sensation. But the matron's voice cuts sharply through the air, instructing you to keep moving. The moment slips away, leaving only a sense of loss. This is how the institution wins, not through violence, but through interruption. Every time your mind reaches for the past, something intervenes. A command, a correction, a ritual, a reminder that who you were is irrelevant to who you must become. You start to recognize that even the language used here is designed to wear down resistance. Words like restoration, guidance, correction, and virtue are repeated until they lose meaning, becoming tools of compliance rather than expressions of care. Conversations with staff are framed as spiritual or moral instruction, but they function as psychological containment. Over time, you internalize these terms, using them to narrate your own thoughts, until you struggle to distinguish between your inner voice and the institution's. There comes a point, weeks or months into your stay, when you catch your reflection unexpectedly. For a brief moment, you see someone who resembles you, but the eyes are different. They are quieter, more cautious, more obedient. You realize that the institution has not broken you in the way you once feared. It has done something more sophisticated. It has convinced you to break yourself piece by piece in order to survive. This is its true power. Its ability to make women reshape their own identities into versions acceptable to respectability. And as this understanding settles over you, a cold truth emerges. The institution has already started to erase you, and you did not even notice when it began. You begin to understand that survival inside the institution is not simply a matter of enduring its routines. It is a negotiation between what you allow to be taken from you and what you decide to relinquish in order to avoid further scrutiny. The matrons, with their calm voices and immaculate uniforms, do not need to raise their tone or lift a hand. Their authority is embedded in the architecture of the place, the unchanging schedule, in the certainty with which they declare what is right and what is sinful. You learn to anticipate their expectations before they are voiced, to correct your posture at the slightest rustle of their clothing, to lower your gaze when their shoes appear in your line of sight. This internalized vigilance slowly becomes instinct, the mental equivalent of walking on uneven ground until your body adjusts without conscious thought. The more you adapt, the more the institution rewards you with small allowances that feel like privileges. A moment of silence during prayers, a marginally lighter workload, a rare word of approval spoken in a tone that mimics kindness. These gestures are not accidental. They are calculated incentives that keep you compliant without realizing that the price you pay is your sense of self. The women around you mirror this dynamic, creating an atmosphere where obedience is contagious, passed from one to another like a whispered instruction. Conversations, when they occur, revolve around rules, tasks, and the rare pieces of outside news that slip through the cracks. Dreams of the future are spoken of cautiously, like contraband thoughts that could result in punishment if overheard. You notice that hope, once an anchor, has become a source of danger because it reminds you of a world in which you had choices. Inside these walls, choice itself is an illusion. The staff speak often of guidance and redemption, but the process they administer is one of reduction, reducing women to manageable forms, manageable thoughts, manageable stories. The more manageable you become, the more restored you are considered. It becomes clear that restoration in the institution's terms is simply the removal of anything that diverges from its rigid definition of womanhood. The institution rewrites not only your memories, but your expectations. You once believed that suffering, when inflicted, had a beginning and an end, a purpose even. Here, suffering is not a moment but a condition, an ever-present atmosphere that shapes your perception of yourself. You hear a matron tell a new arrival that she should feel grateful for the opportunity to learn discipline, and you are startled by the flicker of agreement that crosses your mind. This is how deeply the system has penetrated your thinking. You evaluate your own worth through its judgment, and yet there are moments, brief flashes of clarity where your former self emerges startled, like a figure glimpsed in a fog. These moments are dangerous both to you and to the institution. The system has little tolerance for women who remember too vividly, who question too openly, who cling too tightly to their identities. Such women are watched closely, categorized as resistant, and assigned tasks designed to break them down further. You have seen it happen. A woman once confident and outspoken is gradually worn down through relentless correction, isolation, and the constant insinuation that her thoughts are sinful. Eventually, she vanishes from the workroom, removed under the pretext of reassignment, and no one asks where she has gone. Silence in these halls is not merely the absence of noise, it is the erasure of history. The institution does not allow its failures to be seen. The runaways, the breakdowns, the punishments, all are absorbed into its structure, hidden from sight, replaced by new routines that maintain the appearance of order. Even the ledgers that record your presence are carefully curated, listing virtues gained and faults corrected, but never acknowledging the cost. To the outside world, these documents present a story of discipline and improvement. To the women living it, the entries feel like inscriptions on a gravestone marking the burial of their former selves. There are no protests here, no collective outbursts, no dramatic resistance. The institution has engineered an environment in which rebellion feels not only impossible but irrational. You begin to believe that the problem is not the system but your own inadequacy. This is the institution's most insidious accomplishment. It convinces you to police yourself, to view your suffering as deserved, to treat your identity as something dangerous that must be contained. Even the rituals of the place reinforce this message. Prayers emphasize humility and obedience. Work encourages self-effacement. Reflection sessions, carefully supervised, push you to confess faults you did not possess before entering. Every ritual defines you not as a woman with inherent value, but as a vessel needing correction. You start to lose track of how long you've been here. Time is measured not in days or weeks, but in tasks completed, rules followed, and reprimands avoided. You hear occasionally of women being released, but these stories are vague, spoken with uncertainty, and often contradicted by rumors of those same women returning later. Release itself feels mythical, like a rumor designed to instill hope without providing evidence. You begin to sense that if you leave, it will not be because you have been restored, but because you have become so thoroughly reshaped that the institution no longer needs to contain you physically, it will live inside you instead. This realization hits you hardest when you notice that you have begun to speak in the institution's language, using its terms to describe your thoughts. You refer to your doubts as moral failings, your exhaustion as weakness, your longing for freedom as selfishness. You apologize reflexively even when you're alone. The boundaries between your voice and the institutions have blurred. One evening during the final inspection before lights out, a matron pauses beside your bed. She studies you with her usual unreadable expression, but something in her silence suggests a question she does not need to voice. Have you become what we intended? You feel a moment of panic, a brief surge of resistance from somewhere deep within your chest, but it dissolves just as quickly. You answer her with the submissive nod the institution has taught you. She moves on, satisfied. In that instant, you understand that your erasure is almost complete. You're not the woman who entered these walls, not even a damaged version of her. You're something new, shaped by rules and repetition, by silence and shame. When you close your eyes that night, you try to remember the sound of your name as it was spoken by people who loved you. But the memory is faint, like a voice heard through a closed door. This is the final stage of the institution's work. It does not simply remove your identity, it replaces it with obedience. It teaches you to disappear in plain sight, to exist without asserting yourself, to breathe without taking up space. And as the darkness settles around you in the dormitory, you begin to question whether there is anything left to reclaim, or whether the institution, with its calm corridors and quiet cruelty, has already won entirely. You do not forget the first moment you realize that an institution can outlive its victims. Even after the last of these homes shut their doors, their ledgers remained, with columns of names written in careful, steady handwriting, each one representing a life that had been unmade and then reshaped into something small, silent, and compliant. When investigators and journalists finally entered the abandoned buildings during the late 20th century, They found rooms that looked untouched for decades. Rows of iron beds, laundry lists pinned to walls, prayer cards tucked beneath mattresses, and the unmistakable sense of a place that had never been meant to be seen from the inside by anyone who had not been authorized to control it. What unsettles you most is how ordinary it all appears, how familiar, how clean. There is no obvious horror to point to, no spectacle of violence. Instead, what remains is a quiet, suffocating order, the kind that makes you understand that the worst things done here were not done in moments of chaos, but in routines carried out with discipline. Outside, the narrative had already been rewritten. Some said the past should be left buried, others insisted nothing wrong had ever happened, and many claimed the women had exaggerated or misunderstood. Yet the women themselves told stories that aligned too closely to be dismissed. They spoke of lives diverted, families torn apart, and identities eroded in such a controlled, systematic way that you begin to see the institution not as a building or a set of rules, but as a machine with cogs and gears. Each gear represented by a person who believed they were performing a necessary duty. The cruelty in their accounts is not expressed through overt malice, but through the quiet, dutiful repetition of tasks that slowly dismantled who they were. They remembered the weight of keys on belts, the clipped tones of supervisors, the scrape of laundry bins, the smell of bleach, the cold air in the dormitories, the silent meals, the fear of being called for evaluation, the dread of small punishments disguised as discipline. In each memory, you hear echoes of a system that relied not on breaking bodies, but on reshaping minds. Some women spent a few months inside, others remained for years, and a few never left at all, buried in unmarked graves behind high walls. Their stories resurfaced slowly, often through grandchildren asking questions their parents had been too afraid or too ashamed to ask. What happened to you? Why were you sent there? Why did no one come for you? The answers rarely arrived in a single piece. Some women spoke in fragments. Others struggled to articulate emotions they had suppressed for half a century. A few refused to speak entirely, the silence itself a testimony to the depth of what had been taken from them. When a government inquiry finally attempted to piece together the truth, it faced a wall of missing records, altered documents, and contradictions carefully built into the system while it was still operating. Inspectors learned that some files had been destroyed intentionally. Others had simply vanished. The institution had been designed not only to erase women while they were alive, but also to erase evidence of its methods after they were gone. Those who had enforced the rules, supervisors, midwives, matrons, priests, doctors, were often elderly or dead by the time accusations surfaced. Some denied wrongdoing, others insisted they had been following orders. And a few admitted that the system seemed harsh in retrospect, but argued that it had reflected the morality of the time. That phrase becomes a hollow refrain, an echo used so often it loses meaning. Morality of the time, morality of the community, morality of the church, morality of the family. Each invocation of moral duty had once been used to justify decisions that narrowed the lives of the women trapped inside. Decades later, as reporters pressed for answers, a different question emerged. How could an entire society have looked away? You realize that these homes survived not only because of those who operated them, but because of all the people who did nothing. Neighbors who heard rumors, doctors who signed forms, families who surrendered daughters, policymakers who saw statistics but never faces, communities that whispered but never intervened. The machine thrived because it was fed by silence, obedience, and fear. Even in their old age, many women hesitated to name specific individuals. Not because they sought to protect them, but because the system had been built so thoroughly that cruelty could not be reduced to a single person. Blame dispersed into policies, doctrine, expectations, and the invisible pressure to conform. You begin to see how systems like this replicate themselves across generations under different names and different euphemisms. They hide behind respectability, invoking phrases like care, protection, moral guidance, or rehabilitation. They promise safety while enforcing obedience. And they appear necessary only because the people inside them are described as problematic, fallen, wayward, or unfit. The labels change, the uniforms change, the architecture changes, but the logic remains intact. Every society has a threshold for discomfort, a line beyond which it prefers not to look. When that threshold is crossed, when lives are crushed in ways too quiet to provoke outrage, institutions like this survive in plain sight. Some of the women who lived through it rebuilt their lives after release. They married, worked, raised families, and tried to forget. Others remained haunted, carrying invisible scars that shaped every decision they made. A few never escaped the belief that they deserved what happened to them, a belief carefully instilled by the system itself. What strikes you most when reading their testimonies is not only the pain but the strength it took to tell their stories. to reclaim identities once stripped from them by people who believed they were acting in the name of virtue. You imagine one of them standing before an inquiry panel, her voice trembling but steady as she explains that the worst cruelty she endured was not the labor, nor the punishments, nor the loss of her child, but the moment she realized she no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The institution had done exactly what it was designed to do: erase who she was and replace her with silence. That is why, even now, long after its walls have crumbled and its administrators have vanished into history, the story matters. Not because it is unique, but because it is not. When a society creates a place where people can be hidden, controlled or remade under the guise of moral duty, it reveals a truth about itself. Systems like this do not begin with chains or punishments. They begin with ordinary people convinced they are acting for the greater good. They begin with paperwork, signatures, and quiet compliance. They begin with looking away. And the only reason we know what happened inside these walls is because someone, decades later, refused to look away. That refusal is the only thing that keeps such machines from being rebuilt. The past is not merely something to remember. It is something to guard against. The institution may no longer stand, but the logic that created it lingers in every place where respectability is used to justify silence, and every system that promises protection while demanding obedience. Ultimately, the most unsettling truth you uncover is this: the institution did not need to kill the women inside it to destroy them. It only needed to convince the world that they were better forgotten.